What if the first civilization didn't begin civilization? What if it survived one? Before pyramids, before Rome, before Greece, there was Sumer, in the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, around 3100 BCE. Something extraordinary appeared. Writing, mathematics, law codes, organized cities, monumental temples rising from flat plains like artificial mountains. For generations, historians called this region the cradle of civilization, the place where humanity first became complex, first became urban, first became organized. And in many ways, that's true. But there's something about Sumer that feels less like a beginning and more like a continuation. Because when you look closely at what the Sumerians created, it doesn't feel primitive. It feels practiced. They weren't experimenting randomly. They were measuring land, calculating trade, mapping the movement of stars, recording debts, establishing contracts, building administrative systems strong enough to govern thousands of people. This isn't chaos learning to speak. It's a society already fluent. And that raises a quiet but unsettling question. How does something this structured appear so early in recorded history? Human development is usually gradual. Tools evolve. Techniques refine slowly. Knowledge builds layer by layer. But in Sumer, we suddenly see cities like Ur and Uruk thriving. We see ziggurats dominating skylines. We see writing used not just for myth, but for accounting, law, and governance. The clay tablets they left behind were not romantic documents. They were practical. Lists of grain shipments, records of livestock, marriage agreements, labor assignments, which makes them even more powerful because they prove these people weren't dreaming about civilization. They were living it. And yet, their own records tell us something strange. When the Sumerians wrote about their earliest kings, they didn't describe normal human lifespan. They described rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years, 28,000 years, 36,000 years. Numbers so large they don't even fit within biological possibility. And then, within that same text, comes a dividing line. Then the flood swept over. After that sentence, something changes. The rains become shorter, hundreds of years, then decades. Eventually, something close to what we would consider human. It's as if the flood divides two different realities. Before the flood, mythic time. After the flood, historical time. That transition feels intentional because floods are not minor events in Mesopotamia. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are unpredictable even today. They nourish the land, but they also destroy it. Entire settlements could vanish under rising water. Archaeologists have found layers of flood sediment in ancient Mesopotamian cities. Massive regional floods absolutely happen. So maybe the flood described in the tablets was simply a catastrophic river event that felt world-ending to those who survived it. But the consistency of the story raises deeper questions. The Sumerians didn't just mention a flood in passing. They embedded it into their origin story, into their kingship, into their timeline, as if the flood wasn't just an environmental disaster, but a reset. And here's where the mystery begins to widen. The Sumerian flood story appears in what we now call the Epic of Gilgamesh. In that story, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by the gods that the world will be destroyed by water. He builds a massive vessel. He preserves life. The storm comes. Civilization is erased. When the waters finally recede, humanity begins again. Centuries later, another culture tells a similar story, a divine warning, a great boat, a global flood, a rebirth of civilization, different names, same structure, which suggests something powerful. The flood story was older than any single religion. It was older than any single text. It was part of human memory in that region, long before later traditions wrote their versions down. And that forces us to ask something uncomfortable. Were the Sumerians simply describing river flooding, or were they preserving a deeper cultural memory of something far older, something that happened before writing even existed? Because if something catastrophic happened before recorded history, the only way it could survive would be through story. And stories change. Details shift. Timelines stretch. Kings become larger than life. Lifespans grow symbolic. Memory doesn't preserve data. It preserves meaning. So when we look at those ancient clay tablets, we're not just looking at early bureaucracy. We're looking at humanity's first attempt to record its own past. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't describing the beginning of civilization. They were describing what happened after it almost disappeared.